The little black girl warned the biker that masked men took a child into a freezer room beneath the plant. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into the story. The sun had long set, and the cold air wrapped around the small town like a dark shroud. A carnival, normally a place of laughter and fun, had turned into a nightmare. The distant sound of carnival music was drowned by the sound of feet pounding the ground, frantic and desperate. A little black girl, no older than 9, sprinted toward a group of bikers gathered near their booth, her face streaked with tears. Her small body was trembling as she approached them, her breath coming in short gasps. She barely managed to get the words out before collapsing into the arms of one of the bikers. "Please, they took my brother into the freezer room beneath the plant," she cried, her voice shaking with fear. The bikers exchanged worried glances, each of them sensing the gravity of the situation. The biker closest to her, a tall man with a grizzled beard, knelt down, his leather jacket creaking as he moved. "Take a deep breath, little one," he said gently. "Tell us exactly what happened." The girl wiped her eyes, trying to steady her voice. "I saw them," she said. "The men in masks. They grabbed Jamal and took him down to the old factory. They said they were going to put him in the freezer. I tried to stop them, but I couldn't." Her words were like a cold slap in the face. A freezer room beneath the plant? That didn't make sense. The old plant had been abandoned for years, its machinery rusted and falling apart. No one in their right mind would go near it. But something in the girl's eyes told them this was no ordinary story. The biker, known as Jake Hawk, stood up, his expression hardening. "Where is this plant?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. The girl pointed shakily toward the edge of town, down by the tracks near the old factory, the one with the rusted signs. Without a moment's hesitation, Jake turned to his crew. "We ride now. No questions. Let's go." The engines roared to life, breaking the heavy silence. The sound of 12 motorcycles starting up filled the air, a powerful and eerie sound in the dead of night. The bikers quickly formed a line, ready to follow Jake's lead. As the convoy sped down the road, the little girl sat quietly on the back of Jake's bike, still trembling. She had been through too much for one night. The wind whipped past them, but she could feel a small spark of hope growing inside her. The bikers weren't just any ordinary people. They were her last chance. They were family. The cold night stretched ahead of them, and with every passing mile, the stakes grew higher. What awaited them at the old plant? And could they get there in time to save her brother? The sound of their bikes echoed through the empty streets, a warning that help was on the way. I will continue from where part 1 left off, following the same motif and structure as requested. Please note, the following is written to meet the technical and content specifications you provided. The roar of the motorcycles filled the night as the bikers, now in full formation, cut through the dark streets. The wind whipped past them, carrying the scent of dust and impending danger. Jake Hawk, leading the pack, kept his eyes focused ahead, his grip firm on the handlebars. The little girl clung to his back, her tiny hands gripping his vest tightly, her breath still quick and uneven from the fear that had gripped her moments earlier. They were racing against time. Every second counted. They couldn't afford to waste a moment. As they approached the outskirts of town, the familiar landmarks of the old industrial district came into view. The once thriving area, now abandoned and decaying, loomed like a ghostly silhouette against the dim light of the street lamps. The factory, with its broken windows and rusting signs, sat at the heart of it all, its crumbling structure a testament to the years of neglect. It looked like a place that had long since been forgotten by the world. But not by them. Not tonight. Jake's mind raced as the memories of the promise he made years ago to the girl's father flooded his thoughts. Tyrone had been his best friend, his brother, a bond forged in the hell of war. He had sworn to protect his family if anything ever happened to him. And now, Here he was, making good on that promise. The engines of the bikes hummed steadily as they neared the factory. Jake could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. He turned to his crew, his voice steady but commanding. We stick to the plan. No one goes in hot. We observe first. If there's a chance to get the kid out safely, we take it. The bikers nodded in silent agreement, their faces grim. They had all seen their fair share of violence, but this wasn't just another fight. This was personal. They were here to rescue a child, and they would do whatever it took. They slowed as they approached the factory's entrance, keeping their distance and hiding behind the shadows. The place was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of industrial machinery still running inside. Jake signaled for the group to stop, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of movement. Stay alert. We don't know what we're walking into. His words hung in the air as the bikers dismounted, their boots hitting the gravel with a soft thud. Jake and the others crept toward the factory's rusted doors, careful not to make a sound. The little girl stayed close behind him, her eyes wide with fear and hope. She had led them this far, but now the weight of what was ahead was clear. They had reached the heart of the danger. As they reached the entrance, they could hear muffled voices coming from inside. The sound of men talking. "This is it," Jake whispered. "Stay low and move fast." They pushed open the door, the metal creaking in protest as it slowly parted. Inside, the dim light from a single hanging bulb revealed the cold, sterile space of the factory's old storage room. Rows of steel shelves lined the walls, covered in dust and old equipment. At the far end of the room, they saw movement. A tall man, masked and dressed in dark clothes, stood near a large freezer unit, his back turned. "That's where." "They're keeping the kid," Jake muttered under his breath. The others nodded, their faces set with determination. They didn't have time to waste. But as they moved forward, a sudden noise echoed through the room, causing them to freeze. A door slammed shut in the distance, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps coming toward them. The bikers quickly dove behind a stack of crates, holding their breath. "Who's there?" a voice called out from the shadows. The figure in the freezer room stiffened, turning slowly to face them. For a moment, the room was dead silent, each person waiting for the next move. Then, without warning, Jake sprang into action. He lunged forward, knocking the masked man off balance. A struggle ensued, the two of them tumbling to the ground. The other bikers rushed forward, quickly overpowering the remaining men in the room. It was chaos, but it was necessary. The kid was their priority. In the corner of the room, the freezer door creaked open. Jake rushed over and threw it wide. Inside, huddled in the cold, was a young boy, no older than 10, his face pale and covered in bruises. He was shivering uncontrollably. "It's okay, kid. You're safe now," Jake said gently, lifting the boy into his arms. The boy looked up at him, his eyes filled with confusion and fear. "Who are you?" he asked weakly. "We're the good guys," Jake replied, a reassuring smile on his face as he carried him out of the freezer. The bikers quickly made their way back to the bikes, the boy in tow. They had saved him, but they still had one more task ahead. As they sped away from the factory, Jake looked back at the smoke rising in the distance. Tonight, they had made good on a promise. But the battle was far from over. I can hear the motorcycles roaring in the distance as the bikers make their way toward their destination. The boy they had just rescued clinging tightly to Jake Hawk's back. The group moved quickly, the adrenaline of the rescue still coursing through their veins, but there was no slowing down now. They needed to get out of the factory's vicinity, far from the danger that had been lurking inside its walls. As they reached the outskirts of town, Jake slowed down his bike, glancing behind to check the boy's condition. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide, but there was a faint glimmer of hope in them now. "You all right, kid?" Jake asked, his voice soft but firm. The boy nodded, but his grip on Jake's vest tightened. "Are they gone?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Yeah," Jake replied, "they're gone. You're safe now. We got you." They rode in silence for a few moments, the sounds of the night surrounding them. The other bikers followed closely behind, staying alert for any signs of danger. But the streets seemed eerily empty now. a stark contrast to the tension they had just experienced. After a few miles, they pulled into a small parking lot, far from the factory, and parked their bikes. Jake turned off the engine and removed his helmet, feeling the weight of the situation settle in. He looked back at the boy, who was now sitting on the ground, his eyes still filled with fear. Jake walked over and crouched down beside him. "You can tell us what happened now," Jake said gently. The boy hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting around nervously before he spoke. "They were going to put me in the freezer," he whispered. "I don't know why. They just kept saying I was supposed to be there. They said I was next." Jake's heart sank as he listened to the boy's words. He could feel the weight of what the child had gone through, the terror that must have gripped him. He was just a kid who didn't deserve any of this. "You did the right thing coming to us," Jake said softly, his hand resting on the boy's shoulder. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you anymore." The boy looked up at Jake, tears welling up in his eyes. "I was so scared," he said, his voice trembling. "I didn't know what to do." Jake nodded, his expression softening. "You don't have to be scared anymore. We're here now." Just then, the other bikers began to gather around, checking their surroundings, making sure there was no sign of pursuit. Jake stood up, glancing at his crew. "All right, we need to keep moving. No one can know we're here. We don't want anyone catching wind of what happened tonight." One of the bikers, known as Diesel, stepped forward, his face grim. "Where do we go now?" Diesel asked. Jake turned to the group, his mind racing. "We're taking the boy to my place," he said. "It's safe. We'll lay low there until we figure out what to do next." The other bikers nodded in agreement, their faces hard with resolve. They had done what they came to do, but the fight wasn't over. They still had to protect this boy, and they couldn't let their guard down. As they all mounted their bikes again, Jake glanced back at the boy, who was now sitting on the bike behind him. He couldn't help but think about how much this child's life had already been altered, and how much more they needed to do to ensure he was safe. The convoy of bikes started up once more, roaring to life as they sped off into the night. As they made their way through the quiet streets, the weight of the situation continued to press down on Jake. He had made a promise to protect this boy, but the threat was far from over. The people who had taken him were still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. And Jake knew that they would stop at nothing to get it. The question was, how far would he be willing to go to keep this boy safe? The journey ahead wasn't just about protecting one child anymore. It was about facing the darkness that had already claimed too many lives and fighting to take back what was rightfully theirs. I could feel the weight of the night pressing in on us as we made our way through the streets, the sound of our engines echoing off the walls of the empty buildings. The boy, still holding on to me, was finally starting to calm down, his breathing less ragged. But the fear in his eyes hadn't gone away. The terror he had experienced in that freezer room was still there, lingering like a shadow. I could see it in the way his hands gripped my jacket, the way his body shook whenever he looked around. We reached my place a little after midnight, the distant hum of the city fading as we pulled into the parking lot of a small, run-down warehouse I had converted into a safe house years ago. The bikes came to a stop in front of the door, and we all dismounted, the tension still thick in the air. "Stay close, kid," I told him, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. He nodded silently, his eyes wide, still too terrified to speak. The crew was already getting to work, setting up a perimeter, watching every corner, making sure no one was following us. "We need to keep this quiet," I said, looking at the team. "No one can know we're here." Diesel, the club's enforcer, gave a firm nod. "We'll make sure of it." I turned to the boy. "This is the safest place for now. We'll get you something to eat and let you rest." I could see the relief in his eyes when he realized he wasn't being led back into more danger. I led him inside the warehouse, where the dim lights cast long shadows over the concrete floor. The place was sparsely furnished, just a few old couches, a refrigerator, and a small kitchen area. The atmosphere was quiet, almost too quiet, but it was what I needed, what we needed. I could hear the boy's stomach growling as he sat down on the couch, a reminder of how long he had gone without proper food. I motioned for Phantom, the club's medic and former Army combat specialist, to take a look at him. "How is he?" I asked. Phantom knelt beside the boy, gently checking his pulse and temperature. He's shaken up, dehydrated, but he'll be all right. Nothing a few hours of rest and food won't fix. Phantom's calm voice was a balm to the boys' nerves. I turned away to give them space, but my mind was racing. The boys' story didn't add up. The freezer, the masked men, the factory. There was something bigger going on here, something more than just a random kidnapping. But I didn't have time to think about it now. I had to focus on keeping the kids safe. I walked to the kitchen and grabbed a bottle of water and some crackers. I placed them in front of the boy, who stared at them for a moment before hesitantly reaching out and taking a sip. His hands trembled as he held the bottle. I sat down next to him, watching as he slowly began to eat. "You're safe now," I said, trying to offer him some comfort. He didn't respond, but I could tell he was starting to. "Trust us." The food was helping, but I knew that what he had witnessed would stay with him for a long time. As he ate, I took a seat across from him, keeping an eye on the entrance. My crew was working fast to make sure we were secure, but the night wasn't over yet. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was coming. I had to figure out who was behind this, and why they had gone after a little kid like him. Suddenly, the sound of a phone ringing broke the silence. I pulled my phone from my pocket and checked the caller ID. It was the club's lawyer, Derek Bonds. I answered quickly. "Talk to me, Bonds." "How about some intel?" Bonds said. I did some digging into the factory where the kid was taken. It's been abandoned for years, but recently it's been linked to a new owner, a man named Marcus Viper Santana. My heart sank. Marcus Viper Santana. He was a name I hadn't heard in years. A man from the old days, a criminal with ties to human trafficking, racketeering, and all sorts of other dark dealings. If he was involved, this was bigger than just some random kidnapping. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice tight. "Positive. I'm still digging, but it looks like he's been using the factory as a front for some kind of illegal operation," Bonds replied. "You need to be careful. He's dangerous." I ran a hand over my face, trying to process what I was hearing. This wasn't just about a little boy anymore. This was a full-scale operation, one that I had no idea how deep it ran. "Thanks, Bonds," I said, ending the call. I turned to the crew, who had gathered in the corner, whispering amongst themselves. "We've got a bigger problem than we thought. Marcus Viper Santana is involved." Diesel looked grim. That's a name I didn't want to hear. "Get ready," I said, standing up. "Tomorrow, we go after him." The bikers nodded, already preparing for what was to come. But as I looked at the boy, asleep now on the couch, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation. We were in deeper than I'd ever imagined, and this wasn't going to end until we took down every last one of them. But tonight, for now, we were safe, and that was enough. I could feel the weight of the night settle in as the bikers continued to prepare for the next phase of their mission. The tension was thick in the air, the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on all of us. It was no longer just about rescuing a child. This had turned into a war. Marcus Viper Santana was a name we all knew too well, and if he was behind all of this, we were about to walk straight into a hornet's nest. The little boy who had been rescued was still sleeping on the couch, his body exhausted from the ordeal he'd just survived. I glanced over at him, my thoughts still racing. The plan was simple: get the kid to safety and take down whoever was behind this. But the more I thought about it, the more complicated it became. Viper didn't just deal in trafficking. He ran a whole network of people, and the factory where the kid had been held was just the tip of the iceberg. If Viper had his hands in it, that meant there were other people, other victims. We needed to act fast, but we also needed to be smart. We couldn't just go in guns blazing. This had to be surgical. The sound of boots thumping against the concrete floor brought me out of my thoughts. Diesel, our enforcer, was already preparing his gear, his eyes cold and focused. He had always been the first one ready for a fight. "We hit the factory at dawn," Diesel said, his voice low. "The kid's not the only one we need to save. We take out the whole operation." "That's the plan," I said, glancing around at the group. "We move fast, we move silent. No one gets left behind. No mistakes." The bikers nodded, each of them understanding the gravity of what we were about to do. We had a job to finish, and no one in this room was going to back down. The factory was only a few miles away, and we needed to get there before anyone else did. Viper was a slippery bastard. If he knew we were coming, we'd be walking into a trap. We needed to be 2 steps ahead. I turned to Phantom, our medic and former Army combat specialist. "You got the kid?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah," Phantom replied. "I'll keep him safe." "Good. Stay here with him," I said, before turning back to the rest of the crew. "The rest of you, follow me." The bikers gathered their gear, checking weapons, and making sure everything was ready. There was no turning back now. We had no idea how many people were inside the factory, but we knew one thing for sure. It wasn't just going to be a quick in and out. We were going to be outnumbered, and we were going to have to fight our way through. As the sun began to rise, we mounted our bikes and revved the engines. The hum of the motors filled the air as we made our way down the empty streets, the morning fog still lingering in the cool air. The factory loomed ahead, its dark silhouette like a beast waiting to pounce. The building had seen better days, its broken windows and rusted exterior giving off an eerie vibe. But inside, we knew it was far worse. We had to move quickly. We pulled into a side street near the factory, our bikes roaring to a halt. I turned to Diesel. "You take the front entrance. Phantom, you're with me. We'll take the back." The rest of the crew nodded, breaking off into their assigned positions. We were ready. With a quick hand signal, we all moved into position. The factory was quiet, almost too quiet. There was no sign of movement, no indication that anyone was there. But we all knew better. Viper's people were always watching. We crept closer to the building, the silence broken only by the sound of our footsteps and the occasional rustle of the wind. We reached the back door, and I motioned for Phantom to cover me as I slowly turned the handle. The door creaked open, the sound sending a shiver down my spine. Inside, the factory was a maze of shadows and abandoned machinery. But there was something more sinister lurking here, something that sent a chill through the entire building. We split up, moving quietly through the corridors. My heart was pounding in my chest. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, every sense on high alert. I had made a promise to the kid, and I wasn't about to break it. As we moved deeper into the factory, I could hear voices. Low, hushed voices. I motioned for Phantom to stay back as I crept forward, peering around the corner. In the dim light, I could make out the figures of several men gathered around a table, discussing something in low tones. I recognized one of them instantly. It was one of Viper's lieutenants, a man named Razor. He was known for being brutal, and he wasn't someone I wanted to cross. But we didn't have time to waste. We needed to act now. I signaled to the rest of the bikers, and we moved in quickly, taking out the guards one by one. It wasn't long before the sound of the struggle echoed through the factory, and Razor's men knew we were there. "Get ready," I said, my voice steady. "This is it." The bikers stormed the factory, taking down anyone who got in their way. We pushed forward, our sights set on the final goal, Marcus Viper Santana. But as we reached the main floor, something unexpected happened. A loud crash came from the back of the factory, followed by the sound of a door slamming open. We all froze, knowing that we weren't alone. Someone else was here, and they were coming for us. I could hear the heavy footsteps echoing through the factory, the sound of boots hitting the concrete floor growing louder with each passing second. I knew we were no longer in control of the situation. Razor's men weren't the only ones in this place anymore. Someone else had entered, and they were coming for us. I motioned for my crew to stay low, signaling them to take cover. The sounds of movement continued, the air thick with tension. My heart was pounding in my chest. We couldn't afford to make a mistake now. We had come this far, and we couldn't let the kid down. I looked around at the bikers, each one crouched behind machinery or stacked crates, weapons ready. Diesel, Phantom, and the others were in position, waiting for my lead. The seconds felt like hours. I turned to Phantom, who was still with me, his eyes scanning the shadows. "You got the kid?" I whispered. He gave a quick nod. "He's safe for now, but we need to move fast." I could hear the sounds of footsteps approaching, each one heavier and more deliberate. Razor's voice cut through the silence. "We know you're here. There's nowhere to hide." I cursed under my breath. He knew we were coming. The element of surprise was gone, and now we had to rely on speed and force. My hand instinctively reached for my gun, but I held myself back. We had to play this right. We make a stand here, I said, my voice firm, barely above a whisper. Stay together. No one gets left behind. The factory floor was dim, the only light coming from a flickering bulb overhead. I could make out shadows moving in the distance, and I could feel the tension building as the bikers prepared for the worst. We take them out fast and clean, I said, giving one last glance to the crew. No one shoots unless I say so. We all waited in silence, our breaths held, the seconds ticking by like a countdown to disaster. Suddenly, the first figure emerged from the shadows. It was Razor. His face was cold, his eyes locked on mine as he took slow, measured steps toward us. Behind him, a handful of his men followed, all armed and ready for a fight. You think you can just walk in here and take what you want? Razor sneered. You're messing with the wrong people. I stayed silent, watching his every move. I knew this wasn't going to end peacefully, but we didn't have a choice. This was the fight we had come for. I raised my hand slightly, signaling the bikers to stay put. We weren't going to fire first. You're not getting out of here alive, Razor said, a smile creeping across his face. And neither are the little ones you're trying to protect. My eyes narrowed. The threat in his voice was enough to make my blood boil. He wasn't just talking about us. He was talking about the kid. You touch him, and you'll regret it, I said, my voice low and steady. But Razor didn't flinch. He knew what kind of fight he was getting into. The tension between us was unbearable, and I could feel the weight of the situation hanging in the air. You're outnumbered, Razor taunted, and there's nowhere to run. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned to my crew, each of them ready to make a move. We had to act fast, but we had to be smart about it. I needed to wait for the right moment. I could feel my heart pounding as I watched Razor's men close in. They were just a few feet away now, their weapons raised and ready to fire. But then, something changed. A flash of light caught my eye, and I saw one of Razor's men fall to the ground, a bullet in the chest. The sound of a gunshot rang out, and I turned to see Diesel standing in the shadows, his rifle aimed at the men. Razor's men froze, caught off guard by the sudden shot. Take cover, I shouted to my crew. The bikers moved quickly, guns blazing as they took down Razor's men one by one. The factory floor erupted in chaos, the sound of gunfire echoing through the building. Razor's men fought back, but they were outmatched. We had the element of surprise, and we weren't going to let it go to waste. I moved quickly, keeping my eyes on Razor as he ducked behind a stack of crates. He wasn't going to get away this time. I moved forward, my gun aimed at the crates, waiting for any sign of movement. But Razor didn't show himself. Instead, I heard a noise from behind, and I spun around just in time to see another man charging toward me. I fired without hesitation, the shot hitting him square in the chest. He dropped to the ground, and I turned back to face Razor. I could see him now, crouched behind a crate, his eyes darting around as he searched for an escape route. You're cornered, Razor, I called out, my voice steady. There's nowhere to run. Razor glared at me, his face twisted in fury. This isn't over, he growled. You can't kill me. Watch me, I said. With a swift move, I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. Razor was out of options. The fight was over. But I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something bigger. And we weren't done yet. I watched as Razor's body hit the ground, the last of his men falling one by one to the skilled hands of my crew. The chaos of gunfire slowly faded, the only sound now being the heavy breathing of the bikers who had just taken down a small army. But as I stood there, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Razor might have been dealt with, but the man behind him, Marcus Viper Santana, was still out there. The factory was quiet now, save for the soft hum of the old machines in the distance, and the sound of our footsteps as we moved cautiously through the remains of the fight. I glanced over at the boy, who was still sitting against the wall, his face pale, but no longer filled with fear. It was a small victory, but I knew the true battle was ahead. We had a bigger fight on our hands now. Diesel, always the first to act, stepped forward, his eyes scanning the room. We need to move, he said, his voice rough, his hand still on his weapon. Viper's going to send more men. We can't stay here. I nodded, my mind racing. Diesel was right. This place wasn't safe anymore. But where could we go? And more importantly, how do we get to Viper before he gets to us? I turned to Phantom, the club's medic, who had been taking care of the boy throughout the chaos. How's he holding up? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Phantom looked up from his patient, his expression grim. He's exhausted, scared, but he'll survive. I could see the boy's hands trembling, his face still marked with the trauma of what he'd been through. But there was something else in his eyes now, hope, a flicker of it. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me going. We can't waste time, I said, making a decision. We're leaving the factory and heading to the safe house. We need to regroup, plan our next move. Diesel nodded, his face hard as stone. We take the kid with us. He's not going anywhere until we make sure he's safe. I turned to the boy, who had been watching us silently. You're coming with us, I said, my voice as gentle as I could make it. We'll keep you safe. I promise. The boy nodded, his eyes still wide with uncertainty, but he trusted me. We were all he had now. We couldn't afford to let him down. As we made our way out of the factory, the weight of the situation hit me. Razor and his men were just the beginning. Viper was still out there, pulling the strings, and if he knew we were coming for him, we had to be ready for anything. We didn't have much time. The ride to the safe house was tense, the streets eerily quiet as we made our way through the city. I kept my eyes on the road, every sense alert, knowing that at any moment, trouble could rear its ugly head. Diesel was right behind me, his bike rumbling in the night. I could hear the faint sound of the other bikes in the distance, but there was no comfort in it. Every turn we made, every alley we passed, felt like we were being watched. It was only a matter of time before Viper's people figured out where we were heading. As we reached the outskirts of the city, the familiar sight of the safe house came into view. It wasn't much, just a rundown building in a quiet part of town, but it had served as a refuge for us before, and it would have to be enough for now. We parked the bikes and made our way inside, keeping the boy close. Once inside, I motioned for the crew to spread out. Diesel took the front, while Phantom stayed with the boy, making sure he had everything he needed. I took a seat near the back of the room, my mind still racing. Viper was a dangerous man, and we had no idea how far his influence spread. We couldn't let our guard down, not for a second. As the hours passed, we all stayed on edge, waiting for the next move. But nothing came. The night dragged on, and by morning, we still hadn't heard from anyone. It was too quiet, and it didn't sit right with me. Something was wrong. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being set up. I stood up, pacing the room, my mind racing with possibilities. It wasn't like Viper to stay quiet for long. He was always calculating, always thinking 2 steps ahead. And if he knew we were here, we'd be in serious trouble. I turned to Diesel, who had been watching me from the corner of the room. Keep the kids safe, I said, my voice low. We're going to need a plan. Diesel gave a short nod. What do you want me to do? I'm going. To take a drive, I said, grabbing my jacket. I'll be back soon. Stay sharp. Diesel's expression didn't change, but I could see the concern in his eyes. Be careful, he said, his voice rough. We don't know what Viper's got planned. I nodded and walked out the door, my mind focused on one thing, finding Viper before he found us. The city was waking up, and I knew the clock was ticking. We couldn't afford to wait any longer. I drove through the streets, my mind racing as I navigated through the quiet morning. The city had just begun to stir, the first signs of life creeping through the stillness. The sun hadn't yet risen, and the dim light cast long shadows across the empty roads. The silence felt heavy, oppressive, as if the calm before the storm was pressing down on me. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind was elsewhere, running through every scenario, every possibility. Viper wasn't one to play games. If he knew where we were, if he had any idea where the kid was hiding, he wouldn't waste time. He would move fast, strike hard, and take out anyone who got in his way. I had to get ahead of him before he did. I pulled the bike over and stopped in front of a rundown diner. The neon sign flickered in the early light, casting an eerie glow over the parking lot. It looked abandoned, but I knew better than to trust appearances. I killed the engine and took a moment to listen. The air was still, and the only sound was the faint hum of the diner's old sign. I stepped off the bike and walked toward the door, my hand instinctively resting on the grip of my gun. I pushed open the door, the creaking sound breaking the silence. The inside was just as run down as the outside, with cracked booths and a counter covered in dust. The place had clearly seen better days. But I wasn't here for a meal. I was here for information. I walked up to the counter where an old man sat, his back hunched over a cup of coffee. He looked up as I approached, his tired eyes studying me for a moment before he spoke. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice raspy from years of smoking. I leaned against the counter, not bothering to answer immediately. I knew the man wasn't the type to ask questions unless he had to. "I'm looking for someone," I said quietly. "Marcus Viper Santana." The old man's eyes flickered for a second, a brief flash of recognition before he masked it. "Never heard of him," he replied, taking another slow sip of his coffee. But I could see the way his hands shook, the nervous glance he shot toward the back door. "I think you have," I said, leaning in closer. "And I think you know exactly where he's hiding." The man's face hardened, and he set his coffee down with a soft clink. He didn't speak, but his silence told me everything I needed to know. "You're going to help me find him," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not asking." He looked up at me, his gaze full of regret. "You don't understand," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "He's not someone you want to mess with. He's not someone you can walk away from." "I've walked away from worse," I said, my hand tightening around the gun. "Now, tell me where I can find him." The old man hesitated, then let out a long sigh. "I'm not saying it's easy," he warned, his voice trembling. "But he's been using an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. It's near the docks, right by the river. You can't miss it." I nodded, sliding some cash across the counter. "Thank you," I said. "You'll be fine." He didn't answer, just picked up his coffee and took another sip, his eyes already distant again. I turned and walked out of the diner, my mind set on the next step. The warehouse. It was only a few miles away, but I knew I couldn't afford to waste time. Every minute that passed brought us closer to the inevitable confrontation with Viper. I revved the engine and pulled back onto the road, my thoughts focused on the warehouse. I couldn't let him escape. I couldn't let anyone else get hurt. The docks were coming into view now, the industrial buildings rising up against the skyline. I felt a tight knot in my stomach as I turned the corner and saw the old warehouse standing in the distance. The place looked like something out of a nightmare. Cracked windows, rusted doors, and the heavy smell of oil and decay in the air. It was a perfect hideout for someone like Viper. I parked the bike a block away, out of sight, and surveyed the area. There was no sign of movement, but that didn't mean it was safe. I checked my weapon one last time and moved toward the building, my footsteps quiet against the pavement. The tension was thick in the air, and every part of me was on high alert. As I reached the entrance, I took a deep breath, pushing the door open slowly. The hinges creaked, but there was no sound from inside. I stepped in, my eyes immediately adjusting to the dim light. The inside of the warehouse was vast and empty, the sound of my boots echoing off the concrete floor. I moved deeper into the building, my senses on high alert. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. A movement in the shadows caught my eye. I turned, gun raised, ready for anything. But it was just a rat, scurrying across the floor. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It was quiet, too quiet. I had to be careful. Viper could be anywhere in here. I kept moving, my footsteps deliberate, my hand never leaving the gun. Then I heard it. A sound, faint but unmistakable. Voices. Low, muffled voices. They were coming from deeper in the warehouse. I knew then that I was close. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I wasn't going to let Viper get away. Not this time. I could hear the voices now, muffled but distinct, echoing through the cavernous space of the warehouse. Every step I took was calculated, each sound amplified by the cold silence surrounding me. I crept forward, my gun ready, my mind focused. I had to move quickly. Viper's men wouldn't be caught off guard again. As I rounded a corner, the dim light flickered, casting long shadows across the cracked concrete floor. There they were, 3 men standing around a table, talking in low, urgent tones. I could hear their words now, sharp and full of anger. "We need to move him," one of them said. Viper's not going to wait forever. The man with the scar on his face, one of Viper's top lieutenants, slammed his fist on the table, his voice rising in frustration. We've got a plan. We move. When Viper says so, you don't make the calls here. The other two men nodded in submission, clearly afraid of the man with the scar. It was clear now that Viper had an army of men working for him, and they were all loyal, at least to him. The conversation shifted, and I could hear them discussing the boy. They didn't know where he was, but they were determined to find him, to finish what they started. That was all I needed to hear. I stepped back into the shadows, not wanting to reveal myself just yet. I had to take this slow. I couldn't afford to rush in. Viper was dangerous, and his men were no less so. I waited, listening intently, my eyes darting between the three men as they argued about their next move. Time was running out. I needed to act before they got any closer to finding the boy. But then a sudden noise from behind me made me freeze. I spun around, heart pounding in my chest. A shadowy figure stood just a few feet away, blocking my path. You think you're the only one who's been tracking them? A voice sneered from the darkness. I didn't need to see his face to recognize that voice. It was Razor, one of Viper's most loyal men. His reputation preceded him. He was ruthless, calculating, and had no qualms about killing anyone who stood in his way. I thought you were dead, I said, my voice low, but full of defiance. Razor smirked. You thought wrong. He stepped forward, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. Viper's waiting for you, you know. He knew you'd come for him. He's always 2 steps ahead. I didn't have time for his games. I lunged forward, aiming my gun directly at him, but he was too quick. Razor grabbed my arm, twisting it with terrifying strength, and slammed me into the wall. The gun slipped from my grip, clattering against the concrete floor. My head hit the wall hard, and I felt the world spin for a moment. But I wasn't out yet. I fought back, swinging my fist at him, connecting with his jaw. Razor stumbled back, momentarily disoriented, and I grabbed the gun off the floor, pointing it directly at his chest. You don't know what you're dealing with, I growled, my finger tightening on the trigger. Razor laughed, a cold, mocking sound. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. And so does Viper. You think you could just waltz in here and take everything from him? I'm not here to take anything, I said, my voice steady now. I'm here to end this. And I'm starting with you. Razor's eyes narrowed. You're wasting your time. You won't get a Viper. He's already prepared for you. You tried to lunge at me again, but I was faster this time. I pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing through the warehouse. Razor collapsed to the ground, his eyes wide with shock, but there was no time to savor the victory. I had to find the boy, and I had to find Viper. The fight wasn't over. I stepped over Razor's body, heading back toward the group of men I had been watching earlier. But just as I approached, I heard the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open behind me. I spun around, gun raised, ready to fire. But it wasn't another one of Viper's men. It was the boy. His small figure stood in the doorway, his wide eyes locked onto mine. You came for me, he whispered, his voice barely audible. My heart sank, a mix of relief and guilt flooding over me. He was safe. But what cost? We're getting out of here, I said, my voice firm as I motioned for him to come closer. Now. He hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking toward the men I had just taken down, then back to me. He finally nodded and walked toward me, his small hand reaching out for mine. I pulled him close, leading him toward the back exit of the warehouse. Stay close, I warned him. We're not out of this yet. As we moved through the dark hallways, I could feel the tension in the air. Viper was still out there, and I knew he wouldn't give up easily. But I wasn't going to stop, not until I brought him down. We made our way to the alley behind the warehouse, while my bike waited. I glanced over my shoulder one last time before climbing on the bike, pulling the boy up behind me. Hang on, I said, revving the engine. This ride's just beginning. The engine roared to life, and we sped off into the night, the promise of a fight yet to come hanging heavy in the air. I revved the engine, the sound of the bike cutting through the quiet streets of the city. The boy clung to my back, his small hands gripping my leather jacket tightly. He was scared, and I couldn't blame him. He'd just been through hell, And the worst part was, he didn't even fully understand the danger he was still in. Viper's men weren't going to stop. I knew that much. They were ruthless, and they had no reason to let him go. As we sped down the empty streets, the city felt like a blur, the buildings flashing past in a streak of light and shadow. My mind was focused on one thing, getting the boy to safety. I couldn't afford to let anything happen to him. He was the last piece of the puzzle. The only way to get to Viper was to keep him close, but that also made him the biggest target. The ride was tense, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The warehouse we'd just escaped from was behind us now, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Viper was already on our trail. He had eyes everywhere, and I wasn't sure how long we could stay ahead of him. I glanced over my shoulder at the boy, who was still holding on to me. His face was pale, but his eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. He hadn't spoken much, but I could tell he was processing everything. "You okay back there?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He nodded, but didn't say anything. I could feel the tension in his small body. He was terrified, but I wasn't sure he understood just how much danger he was still in. I had to protect him. There was no other choice. We made a few more turns, weaving through the streets, trying to keep a low profile. The last thing we needed was to attract attention. I pulled into an alleyway, parking the bike behind an old building. I turned off the engine and let out a slow breath, trying to calm my racing heart. The boy slid off the bike, his legs shaky as he stood. I stood with him, keeping my eyes on the street. "Stay close," I said, my voice low but firm. He nodded, his eyes glued to me. I motioned for him to follow me as I walked toward the back entrance of the building. The place was a safe house, one of many we had set up over the years. It wasn't much, just a few rooms and a small kitchen, but it was enough to lay low and regroup. I opened the door and led the boy inside, glancing around to make sure no one had followed us. The safe house was quiet, the only sound the creaking of the floorboards beneath our feet. I closed the door behind us and locked it, securing the entrance. The boy looked around, his eyes wide as he took in his surroundings. I could tell he wasn't used to this kind of place. He was used to something better, something safer. But for now, this was all we had. I moved to the small kitchenette and grabbed a bottle of water. "Here," I said, handing it to him. "Drink." He hesitated for a moment before taking the bottle, his hands still trembling. He took a few sips, then looked up at me. "Are they going to come for me?" His voice was small, full of fear. My heart sank. I wanted to say no, but I couldn't. I couldn't lie to him. "They will," I said, my voice steady. "But we're going to make sure they don't get to you. I promise." He nodded, but I could see the fear still in his eyes. He didn't fully understand what was coming, and I wasn't sure how to make him understand. The clock was ticking. I needed to find Viper before he found us. The boy was a pawn in a much bigger game, and if we didn't act fast, he was going to be caught in the crossfire. I walked over to the table and sat down, my mind already working on the next step. We couldn't stay here forever. We needed to get to Viper, but I had no idea where he was hiding. We had no leads, no clues, just the promise of more danger around every corner. I glanced at the boy again, trying to keep my own fear in check. "Listen," I said, keeping my voice calm. "We're going to take this one step at a time. We'll keep you safe." He looked at me, his face still uncertain, but there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. "How?" he asked. I leaned forward, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "We'll figure it out," I said, my voice firm. "But we need to keep moving. Viper won't wait." The boy nodded, still unsure, but trusting me. That was all I could ask for. As I sat there, my mind racing, I heard a faint sound from outside. It was the unmistakable hum of a motorcycle engine. My heart skipped a beat. I stood up quickly, moving toward the window and peering outside. I couldn't see much in the dark alley, but I knew the sound of a bike when I heard it. And it was close. Too close. I turned to the boy, my heart pounding in my chest. "Get down," I said quickly, my voice sharp. "Now." We ducked behind the couch, just as the sound of a motorcycle revving echoed down the alley. I held my breath, my heart racing. This was it. We had no more time to waste. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest as the sound of the motorcycle engine grew louder. I could feel the vibrations through the walls, each rev of the engine sending a jolt of panic through my veins. I motioned for the boy to stay down, my finger pressed to my lips. His eyes were wide, filled with fear, but he nodded, crouching lower behind the couch. The door to the safe house was locked, but it wouldn't take much to break through. I knew we had to stay hidden, stay quiet, or the game would be over before it even started. I moved quietly to the window, peeking through the blinds. Outside, I could just make out the silhouette of a motorcycle coming to a slow stop in front of the building. The rider didn't get off, but I could see his figure in the faint light, his helmet reflecting the streetlights in a way that made my skin crawl. I cursed under my breath. They have found us. I quickly backed away from the window, my mind racing. How had they tracked us here? I glanced at the boy, still crouched low behind the couch, his small body trembling with fear. I had to keep him safe. That was the only thing that mattered right now. I grabbed my gun, checked the chamber, and moved toward the back door. It was a small exit, leading to a narrow alleyway behind the building. It was our only chance. If I could make it out there undetected, I might be able to circle around and find a way to take out whoever was outside. But I couldn't leave the boy alone. I turned back to him, my voice low. Stay here, no matter what you hear. I'll be back in a minute. The boy nodded, but I could see the worry in his eyes. He didn't want me to go. He didn't want to be alone again. But I couldn't risk both of us being caught. I moved toward the back door, every step deliberate. I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling slightly as I twisted it. The door creaked open, and I slipped out into the alleyway. The cool night air hit my face, the sound of the city far off in the distance. I could hear the low hum of the motorcycle outside, the rider still sitting there, waiting. I crouched down, staying low to the ground, and crept along the side of the building. Every noise made me jump. Every step, every breath felt like it could give me away. I reached the corner of the building, peering around it cautiously. The motorcycle was still there, but the rider was nowhere to be seen. I scanned the street, looking for any sign of movement. My eyes locked on a shadow in the distance. There, standing by the dumpster, was a figure. I couldn't make out who it was, but the posture was unmistakable. It was one of Viper's men. I felt my blood run cold. They weren't here just to watch. They were here to move in. They were closing in on us, and I had no idea how many more of them there were. I took a deep breath, staying low as I moved toward the corner. I had to make a decision, and I had to make it now. I couldn't stay out here much longer. If they found the boy, it was over. I could hear the faint sound of footsteps approaching from behind me. My heart raced as I spun around, only to find myself face to face with another one of Viper's men. His eyes widened in surprise when he saw me, but it wasn't long before his hand went for his gun. I reacted faster, grabbing his wrist and slamming it against the wall, forcing the weapon out of his grip. We struggled for a moment, but I was stronger. I slammed my knee into his stomach, knocking the wind out of him, and he crumpled to the ground. My breath came in quick bursts, my heart still pounding. I was too close, but it wasn't enough. I needed to finish this. I quickly searched the man's pockets, pulling out his radio. I heard a voice crackle from the other end. "Report, did you find him?" I felt a chill run down my spine. They were looking for us. The voice on the radio repeated the question, but I couldn't wait to hear the answer. I quickly crushed the radio beneath my boot and turned to head back toward the safe house. I had to warn the boy. I sprinted back through the alley, my heart racing as I approached the back door. I had barely reached the door when I heard the sound of footsteps behind me again. I spun around, ready to fight, but it wasn't one of Viper's men. It was Diesel. He was standing in the alley, his face grim. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice low. "Viper's men are everywhere. They're closing in fast." My stomach twisted with dread. "How many?" I asked. Diesel shook his head. "Too many. We need to move now." I didn't hesitate. I turned and pushed open the door to the safe house. The boy was still there, looking up at me with wide eyes. "We need to go," I said, grabbing his hand. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded. Together, we ran toward the back exit, the sound of our footsteps blending with the growing noise outside. We had no time left. Viper's men were here, and this was only just the beginning. I slammed the door behind us, the weight of what we had just heard settling over me like a thick fog. Viper's men were closing in fast. They weren't going to let us go without a fight. I turned to the boy, who was still gripping my hand tightly, his face a mix of fear and confusion. "We need to keep moving," I said, my voice steady but urgent. "Stay close." The boy nodded, not asking questions, but I could see his eyes searching mine, looking for reassurance. I didn't have time to reassure him. Not now. My mind was already racing, thinking of the quickest way out. Diesel was right behind me, his face grim, his hand on the grip of his weapon, ready for anything. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice low. "Viper's men are all over the place. If they catch us here, we're done." I nodded. "We're not staying here." We moved quickly through the back corridors of the building, the sound of footsteps echoing in the quiet space. I could hear the muffled sound of voices from outside, but I didn't dare look back. We had to get out, and we had to do it fast. The boy was safe for now, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they found us. We reached the rear exit, and I hesitated for a moment, scanning the alleyway for any sign of movement. It was dark, and the streetlights flickered in the distance, but I didn't see anyone. That didn't mean we were clear. "Stay low," I said to the boy, motioning for him to follow me. We stepped out into the alley, the cold air biting at my skin as I moved quickly, trying to cover as much ground as possible. I could hear the sound of a motorcycle engine in the distance, and I cursed under my breath. They were already on us. "We've got to get to the bikes," I said, my voice tight. Diesel nodded, and we picked up the pace, moving toward the street where our motorcycles were parked. The alley was narrow, and the shadows seemed to stretch out in every direction, but I kept my focus. We were so close, but I could feel the weight of the situation closing in. Every step felt like it could be our last. As we reached the end of the alley, I froze, the sound of the motorcycle getting louder. "Damn it," I muttered under my breath. They were already here. I turned to Diesel, my mind racing. "We need to split up," I said quickly. "I'll take the boy and head for the back streets. You head for the main road and draw their attention. Keep them off us for as long as you can." Diesel nodded without a word, his face hard with resolve. "Got it." We didn't waste another second, but the real battle was still ahead. The boy had just become part of something much bigger, and I wasn't sure what was coming next. But I wasn't going to let him down. We reached the safe house just as the sound of the motorcycles grew louder. My heart raced as I pushed open the door, pulling the boy inside. I locked the door behind us, my mind still racing, the fear still heavy in my chest. We were inside, but the fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I slammed the door behind us, locking it with a quick turn of the handle. My eyes immediately scanned the room, confirming we were safe, at least for now. The safe house, though small and simple, had been a reliable hideout in the past. I could still hear the faint hum of Diesel's bike in the distance, a sound that brought me a brief moment of relief. We were all here, but the job wasn't done yet. We had just barely escaped from Viper's men, and I knew we couldn't rest until the threat was completely eliminated. I turned to the boy, who was now sitting on a worn-out couch in the corner, his eyes wide and nervous. He hadn't spoken much since we made our escape, but I could see his fears still clung to him like a second skin. "You're safe now," I said, sitting beside him, my voice as calm as I could make it. "We're going to figure this out, all right?" The boy nodded, but his eyes betrayed him. He wasn't convinced. I understood. He had seen too much. No one should have to witness the horrors he had. His world had been turned upside down, and it was my job to make sure he didn't get lost in the chaos. Diesel entered the room, his face tight with resolve. He glanced at the boy for a moment, then met my gaze. "We need to move fast," Diesel said, his voice low. "Viper won't let this go. He'll come after us harder now that we've hit back." I nodded, running my hand through my hair. "I know. We got to end this now." Diesel stepped forward, looking at the boy. "Are you okay to stay here?" The boy gave a small nod, but it was clear that he didn't want to be left alone. I understood. He had been through more than any kid should, but this was about survival now. The bikers and I had to do whatever it took to finish what we started. I crouched down in front of the boy, my eyes softening. "We'll be back soon. Stay hidden, all right?" He nodded again, this time with more confidence. I stood up, motioning for Diesel to follow me. We made our way back to the bikes, the weight of the situation sinking in. We were heading into enemy territory now, straight in a viper's lair. I could feel the tension building, but I had no choice. If we didn't strike first, Viper would come for us, and it would be over. We reached the bikes, and I swung onto mine, the roar of the engine filling the night air. Diesel followed closely behind, his eyes scanning the streets, ever vigilant. I could see the warehouse in the distance, the place where it all started. It was now or never. We had to end this, or we'd be running forever. As we neared the warehouse, I could feel the adrenaline surging in my veins. The building loomed ahead like a dark monolith, its windows cracked and the steel doors hanging loosely on their hinges. I could almost hear the echo of footsteps inside. Viper's men were waiting for us. I pulled my bike to a stop behind a row of abandoned cars. Diesel followed suit, and we both dismounted quickly, moving into position. "We take them down fast," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "No mercy." Diesel nodded, his face grim. "We end this." We made our way toward the entrance of the warehouse, the darkness swallowing us whole. I could hear voices inside, muffled, but they weren't expecting us. The element of surprise was still on our side. We reached the back door and slowly pushed it open, my heart hammering in my chest. Inside, the sounds of Viper's men talking grew louder. I motioned for Diesel to move in first, and he slipped inside, his movements quick and silent. I followed closely behind. The warehouse was dimly lit, shadows cast by the flickering lights above. I could see figures moving in the distance, but we kept our distance, staying hidden in the shadows. We had to take them by surprise. I watched Diesel take the first two men down, his speed and precision impressive. They didn't even have time to react before he was on them. I moved forward, my eyes locked on the next group of men, preparing to make my move. I lunged, taking down the first man with a quick punch to the face. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he even hit the floor. The second man barely had time to raise his weapon before I knocked it from his hand and took him down with a swift kick to the chest. We were making progress, but the room was starting to fill with more of Viper's men. We couldn't keep this up forever. We needed to find Viper, and we needed to do it fast. I turned to Diesel, signaling him to move to the front. We couldn't let Viper get away. We had to corner him. We pushed forward, the sounds of the fight echoing in the warehouse as we fought our way through the chaos. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing in on me, but I kept my focus. We were almost there. Finally, we reached the center of the warehouse, where Viper's men had gathered. I could see Viper himself standing there, his back turned, unaware of what was coming. This was it. I drew my gun, and just as I was about to step forward, I heard a voice behind me. "Not so fast." Razor's voice rang out. I spun around, just in time to see him raise his gun at me. The room fell silent. Razor was here, and he wasn't going down without a fight.